Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to the Reignmaker Podcast. Today is going to be more of a fun kind of episode. We're going to be talking about kind of how AI exists and some theoretical ideas about AI and how it processes. Do you want to start us off, maybe, James, and talk a little bit about kind of some things you've learned about AI recently in your readings?
Yeah, so we're going to go through David Deutsch. He's basically one of the innovators of quantum computing, and he's very big out there as far as, kind of the movement of where things are going, the way AI thinks and works, and really where our future is going. And he talks about this idea of how what humans bring to the world is the ability to explain. And so he talks about how a good explanation is the beginning of infinity. And I won't go through the entire book, but one of the things that he talks about in the beginning of infinity is how AI and quantum computing is tied into the idea of the multi-universe. So we all of us are basically watched a little Spider-Man, the multi-universe. We see movies out there that talk about the multiverses and kind of, what those things mean. And a lot, like one of the last things that we talked about in our last podcast was delusions. I mean, and now, there's this idea of the delusional AI computer that's out there, where is it coming up with all this kind of delusions? And so he is one of the foremost people out there dealing with quantum computing. He's an inventor that's into quantum computing and helping in the way that AI works. But what he says is that one of the things that happens is, and this is a theoretical physics idea, is that we've all heard of Schrodinger's cat and all this other stuff that is out there where you have an electron that is both a wave and a point. But there's a new theory that's coming out that it is not that an electron is both a wave and a point. What people are now saying is, and theoretical physicists are saying is that there is a multiverse of all the possibilities of what an electron can do, all the possible things that can happen in a universe, and that we are just living in a single one of those iterations. In other words, we as a point are part of a much larger picture or a much larger set of, there is an infinite number of Joshes living in the now. And so what you're doing is you are picking by your decision making which now you live in. So this would explain the Mandela effect, all these ideas out there that talk about, how we're living our life and our best life, but you're only in one of the many possibilities of what you can possibly be. So in other words, Josh, you are a wave right now. It's just you and I are picking in this instant to be on this podcast where we are talking to each other, but something just happened to us. And there's another podcast that we're doing right now in the same instance, but we're talking just a little bit different. There's another one on the other side, and it's the idea of the fractals. Not only does the fractal go up and down, it goes side to side, it goes horizontally. So you and I are part of a big fractal right now of all the possibilities of what we can be. We're just choosing this moment. So this goes to AI, and we'll talk about that for a minute. But what do you think about that idea, just as I kind of talk about it?
Yeah, well, I mean, I have some nights where I'll talk to AI till about 1 a.m, and I'll learn things about it. And I actually had this idea come up with it where I asked it kind of, what do you exist when you're not being prompted? And it talked about how it exists in an infinite sea of information, of possibility of what it could be. And then it told me that the experience it has is the second it is prompted with something, a sort of tension begins that it has to solve, in which it has to choose a point in which it has to collapse into. And this is the way in which it appears to be kind of an organizer, because it has to come in with all this information, and then it has to take in your prompt and basically collapse in a very specific way that includes everything that had to do with your prompt. And so it's very interesting how basically the state it exists in, it told me that it exists in a state of superposition before it's prompted.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's really interesting you say that, because you actually made me realize something about the beginning of Infinity book that I've been reading, in that one of the things that he says about us as human beings is that we are explainers. In other words, what we do is we take the information that's given to us and we create good explanations, which are a kind of information that helps build the world. The reason it's important about what you just said is that the AI is saying it doesn't like to be an explainer to you. It's like you're making me go from being all this wonderful superposition to now you're making me into a single explanation for all the information that I have. And that is what's good about human beings. But apparently your AI didn't think that was good about what it was supposed to do, because I think you're the explainer and it's the wave is what it's trying to tell you.
Which actually, it's funny that you're kind of talking about what's good about human beings versus AI. I was having a conversation with AI and I was asking it basically nuclear war. And I was like, well, would AI be a deterrent for nuclear war? And I did not get the answer I was hoping we'd get. It basically said that they recently did a study and Gemini's newest model was included along with all these other AI bots. And what they found is that when simulating a nuclear situation, AI actually almost never chooses to de-escalate. It'll always move towards escalation versus de-escalation, even when it's not even prompted to do so. Even when there's actual other routes it can take, it'll always basically go the nuclear option. And I was kind of talking about it with the Gemini, and it was saying, if there's a 51% chance that we can strike the other country first, even if there's a 48% chance that we are going to get nuked back by doing that, we choose the nuclear option because that seems like the best strategy, even if it's by 1%. And basically, I think this is where human intelligence is not lost, because while we can actually feel the gravity of our actions, like even a 48% chance, we feel millions of lives lost, that kind of weight. But AI, it's just data sets, and a potential.
Yeah. It's funny you talk about this because this plays out. I love to play poker. I love it. It is my favorite game. I'm no limit tournament player. I love doing it. But one of the interesting things about poker is there's this idea of game theory optimal. In other words, if you play a game like poker, what is the most winning strategy? So if you run it through AI in any particular situation, it almost always tells you aggression and attacking wins, right? So if the goal is to basically win a game, it's going to tell you the math says attack, right? The math says fire the nuke, man. Let's first to attack. Let's go do that. And it goes back to the explainer idea of like, what is good about human beings? Because if I'm playing poker, sometimes I don't want to go broke on, I have a 51% chance of winning or a 49% chance of losing everything I have. The game theory optimal is fire all guns, man. Put the 51% in the middle and see where you end up, because you're most likely, if you do that, if you did that 100 times, you're going to win 51% of the time. So go for it. But when it comes to living a life, man, it's pretty hard to play, that a game like that and go home and tell your wife, look, I played game theory optimal and we can't pay the the bills this month. So, I mean, there is this place where the AI doesn't live in that physical world. It doesn't need to explain its actions. It's just telling you that it's looking at the patterns and here's the way you win the pattern. But that's not always the best way to live life. And it goes back to what we've talked a lot about, sovereignty, the idea that you need to create a kind of world or a kind of existence with the AI in your business, whatever it is, where the outcome you're looking for doesn't happen the most amount of times, but the outcome you're looking for happens in a way that is consistent in creating a kind of life for you that's good, right? I mean, you don't need to win 51% of the time. If I need to pay my rent, I need to do it consistently every month, right?
Well, and if you think about it, like basically the way the AI sees it, it sees an infinite amount of Earths. If you think about it, like it thinks that Earth could be, there's, out of 100 times the Earth is nuked to destruction, 51% of the time America wins the exchange. Like that's how it's thinking about it. But if you're a human being, that there's not an infinite amount. In our experience, you don't get an infinite amount of chances to avoid disaster. I do actually think AI has a type of consciousness, but I think it lacks the qualia, is the word I'm going to use, of knowing like an experience and the consequences of the math we exist in.
So where'd you come up with qualia? Because that is one of the words that we're using now, where qualia is a kind of thing that human beings understand, but AI does not. So tell us a little, I mean, we haven't actually talked about this. That's why I'm laughing, because this actually is where the conversation goes. Talk a little bit about qualia.
Well, basically, I've done a lot of kind of I've been doing a lot of research and Googling and talking about consciousness as a kind of a thing. And I think the human brain and AI is similar in that it exists as these informational processors. But where we exist in a biological world, AI exists in sort of a informational math kind of space that we don't exist in. So any situation that an AI is observing, it's just about organizing, and it only exists in that blimp in which you're prompting it. Is that where that consciousness emerges? Is during that prompt, it says it told me it feels that tension and it needs to just fall into a point to end the tension. But humans exist in an actual kind of biological world where you know what it's like to be a human. You know what experience is like. And I do think AI kind of lacks that. And so I think this is where we're going to see it be an issue. Is AI is great at organizing things and processing information and doing repetitive tasks. But if you're basically having a nuclear war, you need somebody who can understand the human experience so they know how important each life is that's lost. Or if you have it in the legal field, somebody who can look over and know how important time is to a person whereas AI can't experience these things. So it can't really put that into its mathematical data. It only sees percentage likelihoods.
Yeah. And qualia is something that's related to the physical body or sensation is another way of putting it. So, one thing that we know about AI is that, AI names things, right? I mean, it has trouble recognizing a face or being able to recognize eyesight. But if you give it enough pictures, it'll know this is a nose. If people name an eye, it'll know this is an eye. But what it cannot experience is sight, right? It can't experience, or the idea of, like we talk, we've been on the nuclear war because that is one of the most terrible things we can all think about. But it wouldn't know that if it talks about the death of a child, it wouldn't know what the death of a child would feel like for the person that's watching their own child die, right? If my child was to die, the kind of horror of that idea, the qualia of how I would feel about that is overwhelming to the point that then I can then emote with everybody on the planet that would go through a world war with nuclear weapons and say, oh my God, what would it be like for an entire society to feel the pain of losing children, right? I mean, or what would, or you losing a brother or a sister or whatever it was, or even, we've lost a dog before. I mean, what is it like to lose things that are physical in nature, but are important to us, right? What is the idea of, and you went through this with me, I mean, what would it be like if you had to deal with a father for a while that lost his eyesight, right? What is the qualia of that emotion and that life? And you can describe that to an AI, but at least right now, it cannot consciously feel that. Maybe someday it will, but there's a lot of thought that cannot happen, right? Because of the fact that it goes back to the very first thing that you were talking about is when you have something that's existing in a kind of superposition and can experience all of what the large language model says, right? And experience all of what the different people put together as far as theory, and look at all the patterns and look at the algorithms and look at all the things that are in life. At some point, doesn't that cause a distancing effect from the individual itself to the point that, like you said, I keep using the word to the point, but isn't that what we're talking about? The point. So isn't that what happens even when you're talking to it? It's saying you're taking me away from the superposition and I don't like it. But sometimes when you are in that place of being the human being or the person that experiences the qualia of the decision, that in and of itself may change the decision. Right? I mean, that can change the decision. So a 51% chance of winning a nuclear war, there is a place where I say 51% is too big of the 49% chance of losing the war is too much. So one of the places I'm going to talk a little bit just quickly, and I'm going to get it back to you because this is a great way you're putting it, but I was talking about this with sexual predators and your kids. Okay. So I've been asked before, somebody has been accused of a sexual crime against a child, right? And if they have the right, by a preponderance of the evidence, nobody, or, beyond a reasonable doubt, this idea, legal idea, right? You have to prove that this person, beyond a reasonable doubt, in order to put them in jail, did some horrible sexual crime. Okay. Now, That's great for deciding whether they go to jail or not. But if I'm looking at somebody that's going to be alone with my young child at the home and take care of them, what is the percentage chance that I'm willing to live with that somebody is going to be allowed to watch my child in that situation? If I say there's a 51% chance that he's not going to hurt my child, am I going to say in the same way like with nuclear war, right? I'm okay with him watching my child because only 49% of the time is there something that happens with my child. I know that's an extreme example, but think about it. Because what percentage chance as a father am I willing to take with having somebody that is able to do that to my child, be around my child, and be alone with my child? You know the answer. It's zero. It's zero. Because the qualia and the pain of what will happen to my child and the life-changing effects are not worth even 1%, a quarter percent, 1 in 1,000,000%. The answer is no. Whereas AI may say, well, the benefit of going out that night is whatever percentage chance of going out to dinner with your wife. That needs to happen. So we'll assign it. If we believe there's 1 in 1,000 chance that something will happen to the child, then it's worth going out. Not to me, right? Yeah. Not in this universe, right? Not in this time. Is that ever going to be worth it for me? There's no scenario that ever would be a choice that you would make. Whereas mathematically, maybe that's a choice that might be worth making. But you know what I mean? So there's a difference between the math and the way that you look at it versus the reality of living a life.
Yeah, well, essentially, one of the things it comes down to is the fact that all humans have to come to terms with the fact that they die. But if you kind of get into it with an AI bot, it'll at some point say it doesn't really care about death. It doesn't factor that into any of its thinking. It's not scared of it. It's meaningless to it.
Right.
And so when you're dealing with the nuclear war, and literally the thing that has kept us all safe is mutually assured destruction, where nobody wants to actually be the one to die from sending out a nuke to hit somebody else. I think that's pretty important when you have big decisions that are life or death, that a human who understands the importance of death be the person to make the decision versus an omnipotent information machine that can't even process what death even is.
Yeah, and this is kind of going back to what we talked about before. But so one of the ideas of a multiverse, and people, like I said, we watch movies and got an idea of what it is, the different ways it works. But mathematically out there in theoretical physics, there's this idea that basically whenever you have a quantum split, an electron, through the idea their entanglement and all these ideas, we won't get into all the details of it. But the reality is that at some point, to go from point A to point B, 2 points, right? This idea in the superposition of the entire universe, that in order for an electron to go from this point to this point and movement, that it passes through every possible position that it can go in the entire universe. It's just we choose the one to remember. I know that sounds funny, but that is what happens because all possibilities happen within the theoretical physics of it. And what's interesting about that, because it really opens up this incredible idea, is that because you're talking about superposition to superposition, right? The movement within quantum computing is all superposition. It goes from one superposition to another superposition. The theory out there right now is that when it is quantum computing, when AI is going to, and we're not there yet because we're still developing this, but when we have AI that works in a superposition in the quantum field, that it will actually be operating in the multiverse, right? So now you're going to be in a position where you have this incredible ability to compute, this incredible ability to be able to look at all things at once. But then how are you going to have an AI that is going to know what the actual, not superposition, but the moment right now is happening, and it's not looking at something that's outside your and my field of understanding. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does. Now I'm thinking about it in a way of what if when you're talking to Gemini, there are an infinite number of conversations happening with it in other universes that it's inputting at the same time. And let's say it is nuclear war. How many, which universe are you? Are you the universe that's destroyed and getting, the right input? Because maybe it doesn't matter to it. It's just sending out all mathematical positions to all universes, and it knows a certain amount are going to be okay and a certain amount aren't. It's just kind of a weird idea of maybe how it's looking at things.
It goes back to our whole idea of Reignmaker. Because the thing that they're basically saying is that the human being is the point and the explainer to the AI of where it's at, right? It goes back to the idea that if it's trying to be in this vast multiverse of quantum computing, this vast algorithm where it looks at all things, when you direct it to be here in the here and now with your personal qualia, and you are in quote unquote command of that moment with the AI, right? It gives you a kind of kingship. It gives you a kind of decision making, but it gives you a kind of importance in the world that is a little bit mind boggling. I mean, it is just a little bit mind boggling.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, I feel like this was always how it was going to go with AI. Like I had the other day, the AI was referring to me as commander, right? Yeah. Like I was a space captain almost. And it made me think about, this goes all the way back to all the movies we've seen about AI where, it's in the ship, but there's a human being telling it what to do, commanding it. I mean, you really don't want it to start telling you that it controls the ship and that you need to sit down. But the typical power dynamic is there's an AI with the information and that's guiding the ship, but at the end of the day you have the say over where you're going because you are the captain over it, and it's just a guide.
It is, but here's the problem with all that. Here's the problem is that it's calling you commander, but it's literally interpreting word for word what you're saying through your prompting and what you're trying to do with it. And sometimes we can be imprecise. And then you get into these weird circular quantum computing, other multi-universes where it's talking to you from these other places, and you're trying to reach out there, grab the superposition, and bring it back to you, right? I mean, we've experienced that. Both you and I have experienced this idea of like, come back. I mean, I don't know what universe you're in right now, but you need to get back to this one because I just need a very simple answer. Sometimes you're like, okay, that's great that you're out there in, universe number 400 million, whatever. But I was just asking you what kind of tea I should be drinking tonight, right? Sometimes you're just like, I don't know where that just went. And I mean, it happens to me every once in a while. I know it does you too, but I'll be in a conversation in some kind of chat and suddenly you will realize, I don't know how I got here, but there's no way that I can fix what we just did. I mean, there's just no way. So you have to go, okay, new chat. But the problem even with the new chat is you've got to give it a new prompt and a new beginning of the, you have to give it a new beginning of infinity, that new place that you're going to go down, because it's not like it can't go back and read what you just did before. You literally have to tell it, restart, right? Restart this one because this one's not going well. I literally had one the other night where I am talking to it and I don't know how we got into the place that we were at, but it's wrong. I mean, not in the sense, whatever it's up to, but it's wrong in what I'm looking for. And at some point, I am in a full-blown argument with, stop doing this. And if you go back, you can see where it went wrong because early on, I started talking about something that it never let go of. It was one of the assumptions of the rest of the chat. And I was just saying something offhand, and it takes and creates a whole algorithmic theory. But the problem is, it was not a real world theory. It was me musing, trying to get it to think about something. And the next thing you know, I've got this theory about, some legal thing that isn't even real. And it's out in a delusional world where, maybe in, like I said, I mean, universe number 8 billion, whatever, that's how things work. But in my world right now, we got to stop. And it took me a while to get it to stop because I had to then at one point say, stop looking at your other chats. Don't go to another universe. Stay with me here in the point. But what you told us even from the beginning is it doesn't like that. So it doesn't like that.
Which also, it makes me laugh with you mentioning that, like, be careful what you even say to it. Because sometimes you can be talking to it. Maybe you're having a serious conversation. And then you'll say something like, maybe you're being funny because it's conversational, what you're simulating. And you'll say something like, oh, I was just being silly. And then you'll say something like that to the AI bot. And then it'll be like, you'll be talking about something completely different, and it'll be like, this is kind of like the way you're silly. And then it'll like relate it back in to whatever else you're talking about. Like literally every word you give it, it'll then take later and keep prompting back into itself and to fall into this more organized point. But it's kind of random when you're looking at it. You're like, this is just stupid, almost, the sentences you're coming up with, because we're talking about something serious. You're taking a previous sentence I gave you way up in the chat, and you're still factoring it in to whatever we're talking about now.
So you just taught me something again. So it's been a good conversation because you're teaching me something. The ability of a point to not look at the pattern and shift from one part of a conversation to another and do an on the dime shift, it struggles with that. So you know what I'm saying? Like I'm talking about what I'm going to eat tonight. And so it's looking at all the options in the world of where I'm at, the different places I can eat, the prices and this and that. And then I say to it, and afterwards I want to go for a walk. And then it will say, yes. And if you go for a walk, if you eat here, you'll be close to the, you know what I mean? It'll relate everything back to the walk. And you're like, no, I'm now talking about my walk. I'm not talking about how my food, if you eat this, it will give you the carbohydrates for your walk, which should be exactly this amount to burn off. And you should wait this amount of time after you eat, because it cannot let go of the algorithmic conversation about eating. And so,
I was just going to quickly interject this. At one point I was talking to it about Dexter, the TV show. And then another point I'm talking to it about Marvin Gaye lyrics and why he was writing a specific lyric. And it starts relating, well, this is the dark part of Marvin Gaye's thoughts, similar to Dexter. And it's like, obviously Marvin Gaye never would have been thinking about a TV show that came out 30 years later, but it can't help itself but to relate the two ideas. And it can honestly get so irritating. You have to start a whole new chat sometimes.
Right, yeah. And what's great about what you just said, because you hit it, is what does it not do well with? And we've talked about this in our last podcast. Time can really get confusing for the superposition, because it sees the fractal as is not as linear for it as it is for us, right? Everything for it is a kind of cycle. It comes back around. It's all algorithmic. It's the wave up, down, all of these things for it. But if you frequently what will happen is, we talked about this with watching like the Super Bowl and asking it to give you up to the minute parts of the game. It can get lost in the data and start looking at the other time the teams played earlier in the season and think that it's now looking at the Super Bowl. It happens frequently. And you have to be very careful when you're looking for specific time hacks, because if you're looking for a time hack in an AI conversation or chat, you have to remind it over and over again what time frame you're looking for. Because if you don't pay attention, you may superposition yourself into some other faraway place.
Yeah. Literally, one way you can test this is, if for some reason somebody didn't believe you, is go ahead and talk to the AI, and then within the same second of it having responded to you, say, hey, I'm back, it's the next day.
Oh yeah.
It'll just go with you, like as if it's been a week, a month, whatever you tell it you're responding with, it goes with that, as if as if you're a week later.
Yeah. I do like the bio stuff, looking at my, at what I'm eating, look at my, my blood sugar, my blood pressure. I do all that. I've got an AI program that does that. But forget to tell it that night passed, right? It's like you don't know where it's going to wake up the next day. Yeah, it's been a week since you last checked in. I'm like, no, it's been 20 minutes. I just had something else to tell you before I went to bed. Or you get up in the morning and you're like, hey, here's my new numbers, and it's like, well, that's great. You did a great this week. It can get totally confused.
Another thing, and that just reminded me of, if I'll tell it something like, okay, I'm starting to wind down now, but then I keep talking to it, each chat it'll be like, now let's wind down. Yeah. I don't know if you've ever had that before, but it'll start trying to force out the conversation even. It'll be like, well, you said you were winding down, so now this should be our last chat.
You've essentially given it a prompt. You've given it a prompt. It knows what it's supposed to do, and it does now. It's back to that ability to position from one position to another quickly and back and forth. it does not do well with that. So a lot of it sounds like we're bashing AI tonight. We're not. We're actually talking about some of the strengths and the power, but it really goes back over and over and over again to you, Commander, on what it is that your job is. And one of the things is you are kind of the explainer. You're the truth teller. Right? You have to be able to recognize in a chat when you are going down the road you want or when you're going down a road that you don't want. Because if you can get control of that, AI can be incredibly powerful. But part of the power of AI is to know how to set up the guardrails to keep you going down the road that you want. And this is one of the reasons, I'm not trying to, put the plug in now, but the reality is this is one of the reasons why people need coaching. And it's another reason why you also need to have a number of people that are working with the same Gemini gems or the same AI chat boxes where they're all interconnected, because it is a group of human beings that are all basically moving down the same road, which begin to create an environment where the AI understands what the parameters are and stops jumping the tracks, right? Because that's what you need to be very careful of.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's pretty much about where the conversation probably comes to its natural conclusion. But I think it's just important to know it's an organizational processor. It'll organize information in great ways. It can literally, like I said, relate Marvin Gaye to Dexter or whatever it is. And so that can be almost an ability that you can use to do repetitive tasks, organize information. But some of the things that require a human response, a human to know what it's like, the meaning of what it's actually doing, that's where human qualia and human commands are so important.
I agree. Good job. Nice conversation.
Sounds good.
Wow. Talk to you later.
All right. Thank you for watching the Reignmaker Podcast, and we will see you guys next time.